Georgia keeping its playoff hopes alive. Carson Beck playing mistake-free football against Tennessee, and they win 31-17. Beck finished with 3 total touchdowns, considering he had multiple turnovers in 4 straight games coming in. Georgia's now won 8 straight meetings against Tennessee, each by 14 or more points. Style points matter. Here's head coach Kirby Smart when asked what the committee looks for.
I don't know what they're looking for. I really don't. I wish they could really define the criteria. I wish they could do the eyeball test where they come down here and look at the people we're playing against and look at them. And, you know, you can't see that stuff on a TV. And so I don't know what they look for, but that's for somebody else to decide. I'm worried about our team.
Well, you know who came down there and had the eyeball test? Josh Pate. We welcome him in now. And Josh, you were in Athens when Georgia beat Tennessee last week. What do you make of Kirby's comments? Because you had your eyeballs on that game.
Yeah, well, it felt like, if you didn't know, it felt like a game that it was 2 top 10 teams. It was played at a really high level. It was intense. It was ultra physical. I think Kirby was prepared to say a lot of things if they happened to have lost the game. And they were going to be a 3-loss team, but they were still going to have these games against top 15 competition. And I think he just had all that stuff bottled up, and then they won. And then someone asked him about the playoff, and it was like shaking up a Coke bottle and turning the cap, and he just goes off. He's not saying anything different than a lot of other people have said, both coaches and players and people in our line of work. But I think what he did do is now, instead of just wanting to maybe make a case to be in that thing, I think now Georgia moves to the position of we want to make a case to maybe host one of these home playoff games.
Josh, I think we're going to get our answer about what they think about the eye test depending on what's going to happen to Indiana this weekend. So we're not going to have the answer after these rankings, but we will next week depending on what happens in the shoe. There's your answer about how much they factor in the eye test, what they think about the eye test, because Indiana's resume outside of Ohio State, there's nothing on it. It is the 106th ranked strength of schedule in college football. When you add Ohio State to it, which they will in a few days, it jumps to 45, Hakeem. So yes, we will see how much that eye test matters when we get around to Indiana.
All right, well, we will see what ends up happening that. You could make the case for 5 or 6 SEC teams to make the CFP. And Josh, I have a diagram here that I'm going to make the case right now. Week 5, Alabama beat Georgia. Week 8, Tennessee beat Alabama. Week 11, Ole Miss beat Georgia. Week 12, Georgia beat Tennessee. And in Week 14, if Texas beats Texas A&M, how are you not putting 5 teams into the playoff from the SEC?
Almost ran out of fingers. My answer is
no, I'm not. 5.
I'm not making the argument. I'm putting them in.
Yep.
I had verbal warfare with Cannell earlier today because he thinks that is insane. He thinks 4 is the max. There is no max, first off. I mean, I got to know what the rest of the field looks like. But if all of this chalk largely plays out and Texas doesn't lose to A&M, which would be a whole new can of worms we would have to open. If that were to happen, Hakeem, and I've only got 1 ACC, and I've only got 1 Big 12, yep, and I got a G5, and I'm going to assume Notre Dame. I would put 3 Big 10, I'd put 5 SEC. I think the big point of contention goes right back to what Richard just said. If Indiana loses Saturday, and it's not 49-10 or anything like that, if they lose a relatively competitive game, how far does the committee drop them? We see, like, in the last few seconds, they dropped Brigham Young 8 spots from being undefeated down to 14th. Okay, so if Indiana loses to Ohio State, how far do they drop? If they don't drop far enough, then I'm not getting 5 SEC teams in there because they have sent a message loud and clear that Indiana's probably still got themselves a spot there, which I personally have trouble wrapping my arms around that concept because unlike some of these other teams, absent the Ohio State game, as Richard said, there is nothing there. But I'll tell you what there is there. There's a Big Ten sticker there. It used to be when we talked about teams like this, it was Boise. It was like a G5 team because there's such an anomaly on the strength of schedule for Big Ten Indiana this year that we're talking about them in the same vein we used to talk about like G5 teams. So does that Big Ten sticker carry a little added weight that formerly the little guy never had?
Where I disagree with Josh about that scenario is Tennessee. I look at Tennessee, and I got a side eye with those Tennessee Vols. Yes, the win over Alabama will be a great win. But other than that, they don't have a ton. Got beat by 2 scores against Georgia. And that Arkansas loss also happened. That's a bad loss, I think, for Tennessee, for a team trying to get into the playoff as an at-large. So as far as getting a 5th SEC team in, I don't necessarily think Tennessee gets in. I don't put Tennessee in my bracket in the scenario where you have Texas winning out and not taking the loss to Texas A&M, which, look, we're going to have 10 shows about the college football playoff if Texas takes a loss to Texas A&M.
Yeah, but you're going to have those folks from Tennessee saying, well, we beat Alabama, and you put Alabama in the field. They're going to have that conversation. That's going to be there. It's going to be a legit conversation. And if Tennessee goes to Nashville and beats Vanderbilt, a team that Alabama lost to, another common opponent. Tennessee fans are going to be, I mean, they're coming with forks and pickets and with everything.
Alabama would have stuff to fall back on that would be a win over Georgia and a win over South Carolina. Remember, I said earlier in the show, South Carolina's ranking and South Carolina moving up in the rankings looms large. Missouri also, they blanked Missouri, and for some reason, the college football playoff has a love affair with Missouri. We haven't shown you the rankings yet, but they've got a love affair with Missouri. So Missouri happens to be a good win for Alabama. I don't think it is, but they do. So it matters. And then you would have what Alabama would do, Josh, in the SEC championship game.
Well, we're not going to sit here and pretend like the rankings aren't coming out. You're watching them alongside us, perhaps. And Colorado only moving up 1 spot. What do you make of that? They go up to 16 here.
Win and in. Handle business. Colorado is in a perfect spot right now to handle business. But hey, guess what? Colorado doesn't really have anything on this resume either, if you really want to parse it for an at-large consideration. Colorado has a loss to Nebraska. Nebraska might not go to a bowl game. It's a horrible loss. So, okay, Colorado may win the league. Absolutely. They very well could. But I don't think they're winning on Saturday. We're picking that game later in the show. I don't think they're going to beat Kansas. So Colorado is playing their best football right now, but Colorado does have a resume that is not so great, in my opinion.
Yeah, Richard, the other thing to pay attention to here is, so I agree with you, but the other thing to pay attention to is Colorado's placement relative to Boise. If we just, for argument's sake, project those two to be conference championship game winners, then we're looking at a situation where the way everyone penciled in that top 4 and those auto buys in August gets flipped on its ear, and I got Boise there with the number 4 seed or a number 3 seed. So independent of, whether they could get an at-large bid, I think you and I and everyone else both or all 3 agree that they're not getting an at-large bid. Can they somehow vault themselves up to where they are a higher ranked potential conference champ than a Boise? That to me is becoming one of the unforeseen biggest storylines of this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously got to get past Kansas on Saturday, and then we'll see who they get in the Big 12 championship game, because again, they beat Arizona State per se, or say they beat Arizona State in the Big 12 championship game. That becomes a great win for Colorado, quite frankly, because Arizona State will probably still be ranked by the time that Big 12 championship game comes around.
All right, much more ahead here. The CFP rankings slowly coming out here. We are going to have reaction to the entire field and the projected bracket. Who's in and who's out? Next on CBS Sports HQ. The third set of college football playoff rankings have been released, and here's a look at the projected bracket. A reminder, the top 5 conference champions earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. So Boise State is ranked 12th. BYU is ranked 14th. But in the bracket, again, the 4 highest ranked teams receive a first-round bye. That's how this works. 11 games to be played, culminating with the national championship in Atlanta. From the top to the bottom here on the projected playoff bracket is BYU going to Columbus to take on Ohio State. Alabama, Notre Dame. We saw that a couple years ago. That didn't go real well for Notre Dame. Georgia and Penn State. That'd be a fun matchup. And Ole Miss and Indiana in Bloomington. A first-round matchup there for the Hoosiers and Rebels. All right, back here with CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson. Let's welcome in 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford. And Richard, I'll go your way first. Your initial takeaway is what from the rankings?
My initial takeaway is further down than a lot of people are going to be paying attention to, because a lot of people are going to be paying attention to the top 12, top 15. I understand why. But Missouri sitting there at 23 is beyond the pale to me. This is a team that got beat by a combined 60 points, over 60 points, by Texas A&M and Alabama, and then they lost to South Carolina on Saturday. It matters because Missouri is propping up the college football playoff cases of Alabama and Texas A&M in edgewise ways, because Missouri counts as a ranked victory for those two teams, and ranked victories are something that the committee has in their stated criteria on the website, something that they put a lot of importance in. I cannot understand why week after week after week this Missouri team remains in the top 25.
That's a big bone for you to pick here.
It is, man.
You keep harping on this.
It is, Hakeem. I bring up every single week because it matters when we start to try to parse these teams at the end, because the way we're going to be parsing these teams that are sitting in the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 range, it's going to be parsing them because of some of these edgewise cases, like a win over Missouri that is boosting a resume that shouldn't be.
With all due respect, Brad, that's not my initial takeaway, okay? And I like Richard, but that's not my. I don't care about Missouri right now, and I love Tiger fans, and I love Missouri. It's a great state, and it's a great program. Shouts to Eli Drinkwitz. But my biggest takeaway here is we've got 5 SEC teams in the top 11.
Pretty impressive, right? I mean, Tennessee might be on the outside looking in, but right now the Vols look decent if they went out and finished 10-2. I'm most surprised that Ole Miss right now moved up to what, number 9? That's really impressive.
Yep.
The Rebels had an open date, and now they're 9th. So got a tough game at Florida this weekend. Ole Miss right now, though, with Lane Kiffin sitting pretty good in that 9 spot. I do think we're going to see some fluctuation after this week.
So 5 SEC teams in the top 11. I want to stay right here because Brad and I talked about this on Saturday after Week 12 was final. Brad, we have a situation here where those 5 teams are in the playoff when all is said and done, because perhaps the committee thinks a 2-loss SEC team is better than a 1-loss Indiana team if they were to lose to Ohio State.
Or potentially Penn State if Indiana loses in overtime or some kind of crazy, last-second finish. We're going to have a situation, Hakeem, where it is a 10-2, maybe Tennessee, 10-2 Georgia, 10-2 Ole Miss, going up against an 11-1 Indiana or an 11-1 Penn State. And we're going to see a situation where you either have 3 Big Ten and 5 SECs, or we have 4 and 4. I think it's more likely we're going to have 4 and 4. There's going to be a 10-win SEC team sitting home. Man, these next couple weekends, and especially Conference Championship weekend, are going to be pivotal over these next few polls.
So how can you argue that then, Richard? Make the case against that.
Against?
Yeah, against 5 SEC teams in.
Well, my thing is first and foremost, with Tennessee. I don't love what Tennessee has on the page right now.
Beat Alabama.
Got a good win against Alabama. All right. You got a horrible loss against Arkansas. And you have
They could beat Vanderbilt.
And you have a 2-possession
They have Vanderbilt
loss
on the end of their schedule.
And if they beat Vanderbilt.
Who did Vanderbilt beat? Vanderbilt beat Alabama.
Sure, but if you
can't have Alabama in, Tennessee out.
Hakeem, if you beat Vanderbilt, then Vanderbilt's got, 5 losses? And Vanderbilt's doesn't even have a prayer to being ranked. So
common opponents we're talking about.
Vanderbilt does not get to boost your resume if Vanderbilt's sitting there at 5 losses, at 6 losses on the edge of bowl criteria. To me, that does not boost Tennessee's resume. So I look at that. Now, Indiana's got to take care of business on Saturday, all right? And by taking care of business, I don't even mean necessarily win. Indiana has to be competitive in that game. If Ohio State covers a spread that is creeping towards 2 touchdowns, if they cover that or exceed that, I think Indiana's going to have a problem, because Indiana does not have anything else on their resume to fall back on outside of the Ohio State game that they play on Saturday, Hakeem. Indiana's strength of schedule is 106th in the country. They have nothing on that schedule. Nothing. So
they beat Michigan. That's their best win.
And they struggled to do it. Michigan punked them in the second half of that game. And the reason, or the fact that that Michigan punked them in the second half of that game and made it very difficult on Indiana to win, quite frankly, is why I'm pretty worried about Indiana on Saturday against Ohio State. Indiana has to acquit themselves well in that Ohio State game. Indiana has done the first thing that good teams do, which is beat bad teams. And they got a whole host of bad teams on that schedule. But the other thing that good teams do is they beat other good teams. So you have to play really well against this Ohio State team.
Brad,
don't give them an excuse.
Brad, to Richard's point, is there a score threshold? Like, does Indiana have to keep it within 2 touchdowns? Or heck, if they win outright, then this conversation is moot. But my point is, does Indiana have to keep it within 2 touchdowns to have that argument really sink in?
I mean, I think a 38-20 loss, even if the Hoosiers do not cover, and it's somewhat competitive, 11-1 is going to get Indiana in. This is a record-setting season. I think the committee is sort of taking that into consideration. Game control has been a positive for Indiana. They've blown out most opponents. I want to touch on one thing, too, the Tennessee-Bama situation. The reason right now the committee is not looking at Tennessee's win over Bama as sort of the outlier there is because the committee likes Bama more than Tennessee right now. And head-to-head only matters when everything else is equal. Well, the committee does not see those 2 teams equal right now, despite the Vols beating the Crimson Tide. Alabama has that win over Georgia. They beat South Carolina. That's a quality win Tennessee does not have. And Tennessee has a bad loss at Arkansas. Another 2-loss SEC team, Ole Miss, scored 63 points in Fayetteville. So
Indiana
Tennessee
also,
right now, even though they're inside the top 12, ain't looking too good for the Vols.
I'm sorry about that, Brad. Indiana also doesn't necessarily own that top 5 spot because we've seen what happens when you take a loss. The committee just punted for a week, punted Georgia out of their spot, and they were, what, 2 or 3 in the country when they went into Oxford and lost to Ole Miss.
Correct.
They were last week on the outside looking in. Now they're back because they beat Tennessee. But again, this is not a hard and fast thing that they belong in this 12-team field. If they lose against Ohio State, the committee has shown that they'll knock you out. They'll kick you out.
Well, BYU was 6 last week.
Yeah.
They're all the way down to 14. They dropped 8 spots.
Yeah.
So to me, that tells you that they don't believe in BYU. And we sat up here on this very desk and we said we didn't believe in BYU. And it's not because we don't like the program or we don't like the players or we don't like the head coach. We just don't believe them being a top-tier team. Like, I have a ton of respect for BYU. But I had people chattering and all in the comments up and down about how BYU wasn't getting enough respect. BYU had a chance to get more respect at home against Kansas. It did not. It did not. They got that win against rival Utah. They're down. That tells you right there, to me, Brad, what the committee thinks of Indiana. When you talk about this conversation involving Indiana, they're still there. They're still 5 in the country.
That's because the committee respects teams without a loss. Unblemished records mean everything to this committee. But once you lose a game, if you don't have a good resume, you get jacked outside of the top 10 quickly, man. And that's what we saw with BYU. We saw BYU in those first rankings, number 9, maybe underrated a bit. Then they moved to 6. But now they've been properly rated outside of the top 12 after that loss, as you mentioned. So it's obvious, man, that the Big 12 is going to be a one-bid league. And we have mentioned that situation where the top, 5 highest-rated conference champions get auto bids. What if the Big 12's not inside that top 15?
Then they're in trouble. But I don't think that's going to be the case because right now, for the sake of this conversation, this exercise, BYU is in. They're the 12 seed. They're taking on Ohio State. So if you're sitting here, we can sit here and argue about how good BYU is or what that loss meant. If they take care of business against Arizona State and then Houston, they're going to be in. And if they can beat Colorado, they're in. But the problem lies in, can they beat Colorado? Can they beat ASU? That's a big question. Can they beat Houston? Yeah, sure. Why not? My thing is here, it's going to come down to that conference title game. If they both win out, saying Colorado and BYU, who do you got in that game? Because to me, you could go either way there, and that team's getting in.
The thing I think we also need to point out is what Brad just said. Unblemished records matter.
Yes, they do.
A team that you haven't brought up sits in these college football playoff rankings. It is the Army Black Knights. If Army can remain undefeated, it would mean they've beaten Notre Dame.
Correct. Notre Dame would be
in
out
a few days
Yep.
in a Yankee Stadium. That would be a tremendous win for Army. So if it comes down to, for that 5th automatic qualifier spot, Boise State, who wins out, Army, who wins out, and then the Big 12 champion, I am not so sure the Big 12 champion gets in. I don't even think I'd put them in my field if I were drawing the field. I think you give those
I disagree with you there, but I can respect that. I disagree.
Because Army would also have beaten Tulane
Agreed.
in an AAC championship.
But I think when all is said and done, when there's Selection Sunday, Brad, I think the Big 12 champion will be in the playoff field. I don't really think that I know there's a scenario, but based on what I have seen, based on what you have seen, I think that you're probably starting to believe that Colorado and BYU, those are two very good those are quality teams, and if that one of the team that wins the Big 12, they got to put them in the field. You got to put them in the field.
I can't imagine the college football gods allowing, Coach Prime to win a Big 12 championship his first season in the Big 12 and not get in on like a 7-game winning streak entering the playoff. I do like what Richard said though, and we saw tonight Tulane is up 5 spots.
Yep.
We didn't think they'd jump 5 spots after shutting out Navy, but here they are. So that's going to be 2 quality wins for Army if they're able to Yankee Stadium, beat Notre Dame, and then beat Tulane in the AAC championship game. So, yeah, I don't think it's a shoe-in that Colorado BYU winner is going to be in. But if it is Colorado and BYU, say, loses to Arizona State and still somehow backs its way in, I don't know, man.
You can't leave the Big 12
champion out. There's no guarantee right now.
You can't leave the Big 12 champion out.
Why not?
Because you can't. Not when there's 12 teams in a playoff.
Why not?
You can't.
You don't have a blood.
No. I don't see the committee going, we're going to leave the Big 12 out in our first year of the expanded playoff.
You do not
This is an amazing conference.
To the college football
Colorado's
playoff.
resume won't be as good as Army.
Colorado's resume will not be as good as
Army getting in. I'm fine with Army getting in. I'm rooting for Army. I hope Army has absolute chaos on Saturday at Yankee Stadium.
Well, Boise's resume is better than Colorado. If you stack Boise up,
you're not wrong.
Next to Colorado,
I won't disagree with you.
They're going to leave them out. They're going to leave them out.
I can't see how a Big 12 champion would be left out.
Just because you call it a Power 4 conference in name does not mean they have a blood right to get in this dance. It does not matter what your average resume with your average payout with your TV deal is as far as how you stack up as a conference to get in this dance. Now, it would be a hell of a promo that Coach Prime would cut. Talk about it. We would have to have Coach Prime on because Coach Prime, I don't even know, he would burn the whole thing down.
So you're telling me, Brad, you're telling me that 1 year after Florida State doesn't get in, after going undefeated, that a former Florida State standout, Deion Sanders, wins the Big 12 and he's not in the playoff? Get out. I can't see that.
I think it helps, too, that Travis Hunter is going to win the Heisman.
There you see?
You want to have the Heisman winner in this playoff,
But what if it's BYU that wins it? Hold on. What if BYU wins the Big 12 title game? Are you keeping them out in your scenario?
BYU wins out?
Yes, wins out. They win their final 3 games.
That's when it gets dicey. If BYU wins out, I think you're going to have a hard time parsing between, again, undefeated.
Because Kansas is playing like South Carolina is right now.
Right.
They're upset-minded. They're playing the way we thought they were going to play at the beginning of the season.
Remember what you'd have to parse. You would have to parse an undefeated Army that would have a resume that includes a win over Tulane and Notre Dame against Boise State and then against your Big 12 champion. I don't know, man.
We're not going to have an undefeated team be left out of the playoff. We expanded this thing to get more unbeatens in. An unbeaten team is not getting left out.
I agree with him.
Yeah.
I agree with him.
I do. I agree with you guys. Can you imagine, though, if Army beats Notre Dame? Have you played that scenario out in your mind yet, Richard?
Oh, it would have to be the perfect Army day. I'm talking about 6 possessions per side. The thing's already in Yankee Stadium. It's going to look like a game from 1940 whatever. So just make this the most retrograde, set the sport back 50 years, 0 passes, and Army finds a way to get it done in Yankee Stadium, just like the 4 Horsemen did way back when. It would be something.
I love Jeff Monken's program, what he does with these young men, and look, they're a fun team to watch. Bryson Daly, I mean, he should be in the Heisman conversation, no question. But Notre Dame, Brad, right now, if you ask me a couple teams you don't want to face right now, it's Notre Dame. Week in and week out, they are forcing multiple turnovers. Like, they're nasty on defense. They found their groove.
Elite secondary, yeah. I mean, I think the game plan for Army should be just what Richard said. I mean, you have a 18-play, 9-minute drive, then maybe an onside kick, and Notre Dame doesn't get the ball for an entire quarter. You're trying to limit possessions I think Monken's going to pull out all the stops, man. But I'm with you. Notre Dame as a first-round home game team at 11-1, it's going to be a tough out because Riley Leonard's playing really well. He's healthy. Running game solid right now.
I want to be clear. I think Notre Dame's going to win that game.
That's fine.
I think Notre Dame's going to beat them pretty soundly. But just like Brad is saying, with the way that Army will pull out all the stops, they're going to go for it on fourth down. You saw the fake field goal that they had a couple weeks ago. Like, they're going to do what they can to make it just a junk ball afternoon for Notre Dame. Notre Dame better strap it up.
Just a couple of 12-minute clock-draining drives for Army, right? Like that, they've done that. They've done that this season just a couple weeks ago. They're a team that can certainly do that. I love the chaos. I'm here for the chaos. Look, if we've made the argument for SEC teams, for 5 SEC teams, how good they are, but maybe the committee has SEC fatigue. Maybe we want to get some new programs in the playoff. Maybe we want to see some new blood. Maybe that's what their criteria is, because you heard Kirby Smart. It's like, I don't know what they're looking for.
When they expanded this thing, it was clear, they made it clear that this was about participation. It was about increasing participation across college football. So let's see. I do think a 12-team rankings logic is different than a 4-teams ranking logic. We'll see what happens in a couple of weeks when we get to the end of this this marathon.
Fun conversation. That was a really fun conversation. This will continue throughout Selection Sunday. Brad Crawford, Richard Johnson here on CBS Sports HQ with our initial takeaways. Coming up, the biggest winners and losers from the latest college football playoff rankings, next on CBS Sports HQ. The third set of college football playoff rankings have been released. Here's a look at the projected bracket. A reminder, the top 5 conference champions will earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. And Boise State now getting a first-round bye, ranked higher than projected Big 12 champion BYU. BYU 14th in the rankings. Boise State is 12th. So BYU would visit Ohio State in the first round. Alabama, Notre Dame, they just met in the Rose Bowl a few years ago. Georgia and Penn State in Happy Valley. Look at this. 3 Big Ten teams with home games. Indiana hosting Ole Miss in Bloomington. So welcome in CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson and 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford here to talk winners and losers. Richard, I'll start with you. Your biggest winner from the third set of CFP rankings is who?
My biggest winner is Tennessee, because Tennessee's still hanging around in that top 12. And we've talked about it during this show. I don't have Tennessee personally in my top 12 when all is said and done in a scenario where you're trying to talk me in to 5 SEC teams getting in. If Texas wins out, Georgia wins out, Bama wins out, and Ole Miss wins out, I think the 4 of them go, and I would not have Tennessee in that specific circumstance. So the committee's currently telling you that they value Tennessee quite highly. And so I think because of that, Tennessee's a big winner.
The committee also loves Alabama right now.
Yeah, they do.
That's my big winner. 3 spots after beating Mercer, partly because 2 teams ahead of Bama lost. But this is a great scenario for Bama, guys, because we didn't think a 3-loss SEC team could get in. Bama could foreseeably go to Atlanta, lose to Texas, and get in at 10-3, because right now at number 7, they've got some spots they can fall if they're competitive against Texas and lose in Atlanta. So even though Lane Kiffin said that right now no SEC team really wants to play in the championship game because of a possible 3rd loss, I think Bama's sitting pretty that we could see the first ever 3-loss team get in.
See, the risk, though, of getting a bye is huge. What's a bigger deal? 3 losses or the bye?
I think people are really overlooking the bye week aspect.
Huge.
The bye week aspect of things, where if you don't get a bye and you have to play, but you lost your conference championship game, you may be playing a team coming off of a bye. You may be playing a team that didn't go to its conference championship game where you did. Therefore, you've played 6, 7, 8 straight weeks of football, and you're getting a team fresh. Yeah, it's a home game, but you're getting a team fresh. The bye is such a massive deal, and I think a lot of people are just kind of poo-pooing.
I think you guys both just gave your winner, and they're both from the SEC. 5 teams in the top 11 here in the latest rankings. Tennessee and Alabama. Look, if one of those teams is left out, one fan base is going to be, you know what. I mean, they are going to be irate, especially if they say, well, hey, we had 2 losses Indiana lost. They didn't play anybody. Like, that's what the conversation will be from those fan base. They'll say, this 12-team playoff, it didn't even prove it. It didn't prove anything. That's what they'll say.
Well, Brad, it ain't going to be the fan bases either. It ain't going to be just the fan bases.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
It's going to be a certain conference office in Birmingham, Alabama that's going to have a very serious issue if that happens. Brad knows exactly what I'm talking about. I think the SEC, Commissioner Greg Sankey, and their apparatus, they're going to go nuclear if that happens.
Well, we'll wait to see. We will wait to see, Brad. All right. Brad, your biggest loser from the latest CFP rankings is who?
Yeah, BYU falling to 14. I was kind of surprised that they dropped that far after the committee corrected its ranking on the Cougars last week. But you can't lose at home like that, man. And it's a bad loss for BYU. They still control their own destiny. We have talked about previous segment that maybe the Big 12 championship game, BYU can still get there, win it, and get in the playoff. But now there is no margin for error for the Cougars. They have to win out. Got to beat Colorado in a couple of weeks if the Buffs keep winning. But number 14 this week, that's not a great look for Kalani Sitake.
I agree with Brad. BYU, my biggest loser as well. Frankly, I think they're pretty adequately rated where they ended up falling. I had some serious questions about BYU. I picked them on this set to lose to Kansas, and then they did last week. So I agree with Brad. Biggest loser this week. The committee has shown what they have, and coming home, it ain't easy. Arizona State this week, and then that Houston team that everybody sort of forgot about, that Houston team will get you. Because it's the Big 12, and all these games in the Big 12 are like within a field goal spread. I mean,
yeah, a lot of one-possession games.
With Kansas, all of these, and when you get in one-possession games, you don't know what can happen. One week, you get a miracle defensive holding call that helps you get the win. Another week, a pooch punt bounces off your return team, and you lose the game.
BYU had been 4-0 in one-possession games. They lost their first one-possession game and their first loss of the season as they lose to Kansas, falling some 8 spots in this week's rankings. But they're still in the field, okay? The Cougars are still in the field. Jake Retzlaff's still in the field with the BYU Cougars, so don't be hating on them too much. Our winners and losers, Brad Crawford, Richard Johnson. And right now, Ohio State is the favorite to win the national championship. 8 titles in school history. Their last was in 2014, the first year of the college football playoff. Just like college basketball, we're on bubble watch in college football. Indiana looking to beat Ohio State for the first time since 1988. Can they cover the spread? Next on CBS Sports HQ. Bubble watch in college football. Here's a look at the notable games in Week 13. Monster game in Columbus. Ohio State has won 29 straight meetings versus Indiana. Last loss, 1988. Ole Miss off a bye visiting Florida. Rebels are double-digit favorites at the Swamp. Colorado taking on upset-minded Kansas. Jayhawks just beat BYU. And Notre Dame clashing with undefeated Army at Yankee Stadium. Here with CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson, and let's welcome in 2-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden, also a former Florida State standout, here to break down the big games in Week 13. Start in Columbus, where Ohio State is a 12.5-point favorite. Hoosiers haven't beaten the Buckeyes since 1988, but Indiana's 6-1 against the spread in their last 7 road games against Ohio State. BMAC, in terms of the spread, is the trend our friend?
Yeah, I'm following the trend in terms of the Hoosiers. They've been outstanding. Granted, you look at their schedule, it hasn't been extremely difficult. Their most impressive win, I think, has been against Michigan. But outside of that, they can score points. They get timely stops on the defensive side. And they have a quarterback who's not afraid to sling it around the yard. So to your point, you look at this line and the Hoosiers receiving 12.5. I got to pay to see it, guys. I got to pay to see it. You know what I mean? And, you know, who knows, a backdoor cover is something that we all love. As long as the cover happens, I can easily see a backdoor cover as well. But don't sleep on Indiana. Do not sleep on Indiana, because their offense has been prolific. They play with a lot of confidence, and they have some dudes on the offensive side that can do some damage when they get the football in their hands. So me personally, I'm following the trend, Hakeem. Give me the Hoosiers getting 12.5.
B-Mac, my brother, I'm sleeping, I'm snoring. I got sleep apnea as far as it's concerned about Indiana against Ohio State. A couple years ago, if you'll remember, a Michigan State team that a lot of people thought was really good beat Michigan, took a loss to Purdue, but they went into Ohio State. And you know what Ohio State did with them? It was a weight class game. It was, we're Ohio State and you're not. And I fear that that may be what we're looking at happening in this game. I think Ohio State, primarily because of what I saw in the second half for Indiana in the trenches against Michigan. Indiana was pretty unable to move the ball in that game. Yes, they won, but I think that's a significant indicator that Ohio State can be better than Michigan was in the trenches against Indiana and control the game, win the game, and cover 12.5.
Indiana plus 385 on the money line if you want a little sprinkle there to see if they can absolutely pull off the upset and beat Ohio State. We'll see about that. Ole Miss coming off a bye. Last game they beat Georgia, visiting Florida this week, where the Rebels are double-digit favorites. The Gators are 3-0 against the spread when DJ Lagway starts versus FBS teams. Richard, who's starting this week for Florida?
That'd be one Derek Lagway Jr. And because he's starting, I will be taking the Gators to cover in this spot. I think that Florida's offensive line is one of the most unheralded offensive lines in the SEC, and I think they'll be able to hold up enough against what Ole Miss has up front. Ole Miss is very formidable up front with their players, Prince Emmanuel, Walter Nolan, J.J. Pegues. What they have up front on the defensive line is very, very formidable. But I think Florida should be able to hit enough big plays to at least keep pace. The hook. The hook is my friend here when I talk about Florida covering the spread.
And you know what? If the hook is your friend, it's my friend as well. And I'm okay in buying maybe a half point up, maybe buying it to 11. But to your point, Rich, I'm taking the Gators as well. And it's hard for me to say that being a no, but it's my job to give you unbiased analysis. And most importantly, try to put money in your pocket. I believe the Florida Gators are playing some expired football. They're playing with a lot of confidence. To your point, DJ Lagway, he's acclimated to this QB1 role for the Gators offense, and they're at home. They are at home. I would feel totally differently. I would feel differently if this game was in Ole Miss, but they're at home. They're in the swamp. So that means something in terms of them covering this spread. I don't expect Florida to do anything money line wise. I wouldn't sprinkle anything on this money line, but in terms of covering this spread, yes, give me the Gators as well. Until my point earlier, if you want to buy it up a half point and get it to 11.5, I'm okay with that. But I do believe Florida will have enough to cover this 10.5.
Yeah, if you're curious, Florida plus 280 on the money line. Not really enough value there on a sprinkle. In the 3:30 Eastern window, Colorado plays upset-minded Kansas at Arrowhead in Kansas City. The Jayhawks just beat BYU. The Buffs cannot afford another loss. Colorado's a short 2.5-point favorite. Richard, you know that I like Colorado as of late. I've jumped on the Buffs bandwagon. Who do you like in this spot?
Hakeem, I sat next to you, my friend, on this desk last week, and I took Kansas to at least put a dent in the playoff dreams of BYU. I'm sitting on this desk right next to you this week, and I'm taking Kansas to put a serious dent in the college football playoff chances of Colorado. I think Kansas wins this game outright. Jalen Daniels has stopped giving the ball to the other team. They didn't even play that well on offense, to be honest with you, against BYU, and they were able to get it done. I think Kansas can win this game. What they have with Jalen Daniels playing his best football right now, Devin Neal at running back, Jayhawks win it outright, B-Mac. You heard it here first, my friend.
Look at that face.
I got that little baby face when you give the baby some baby food, it don't taste good, and you're like, ooh.
Yeah, like the peas.
Rich, I didn't like
when you give them the peas, they don't like the peas.
No.
Give them the sweet potatoes.
Kansas over one of the hotter teams in college football, led by two high-level NFL prospects offensively, and Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. Do you believe Rock Chalk Jayhawk will have enough to keep pace with the Buffaloes on the offensive side? No way, Jose. Give me Colorado. They will not be denied. They will not allow Kansas to put a dent in their Big 12 title hopes. This will be a speed bump-like game for Colorado, but this is a residential speed bump. It's one of those speed bumps where you see it and you kind of just go over it. You see it, but you don't really slow down. That's what I see happening in this ball game, because what they did last week against Utah's defense, one of the more respected defenses in the Big 12, they had no answer in slowing down those high-level prospects at their skill positions for Colorado. So, Rich, I'm sorry, That baby food you just gave us in terms of analysis, it didn't taste good. Give me Colorado.
Do you know what Dion is going to say to his kids? He's going to look them in the face, and he's going to say, men, this is an NFL stadium. You have a chance to play here one day. We're at the home of Patrick Mahomes. Travis Kelce plays here. He's going to look at Shedeur. He's going to go, son, you want to be a top draft pick? You better perform today against Kansas. Travis Hunter, you're going to go #1 overall. Show them what an NFL player looks like in college. You are going to win the Heisman. This is the day that you will win it, right here against Kansas. I'm not messing around here. Give me Colorado. I'm with BMAC. Give me Colorado.
Everybody believes.
Well,
Everybody believes.
You know, that's fine. Hey, I'm jumping on the bandwagon. Okay, so if we get tripped up and we hit a rock, then fine, we hit a rock. I'm going with them.
And I can tell you this much: this will be Travis Hunter's Heisman moment.
Had one last
this will be his moment that he solidifies the award. If he puts forth the effort, like we believe he can on this stage, to kind of get them into that safe spot for a Big 12 title, book it. Hit the polls.
There we go.
Way.
He
So
did it last week.
way.
One of the most anticipated games on the schedule takes us to Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame against undefeated Army. The Fighting Irish, 14.5-point favorite. BMAC, this feels disrespectful. 14.5?
Yeah, it is. I'm scared of this line, guys. I'm honest. This line is confusing to me. Bryson Daly is healthy, right?
Yep.
Like, we haven't heard anything, any illness or off the field issues. He's going to participate. So with that being said, I got to take Army. I'm taking Army because their offense has been high-powered. And the thing I like about Army, they can throw the football when need be. Bryson Daly is like their Taysom Hill for their offense. And we just saw what Taysom Hill did to the Cleveland Browns. No pun intended, Hakeem, but I just had to use him as an example.
Hey,
because
I'm good. It's fine. I'm
Bryson
good.
Daly plays the quarterback position. But, hey, Rich, give me Army getting the points. It's 14.5. I really feel comfortable in Army getting this, being able to cover this spread, getting 14, because I love their offense. And they have a little bit balance, a little more balance than what we've seen in years past in terms of throwing the ball.
BMAC, we're simpatico here, my brother. I am also taking Army. The hook. We talk about the hook. The way Army is able to control the pace of games, the tempo of games, 6 drives apiece maybe in this game. They're going to take the air out of the ball. They're going to hold it all afternoon if you give them the chance. Because of that, I'm taking Army to cover the spread. They're going to go for it on 4th down. They may have a fake field goal, may have a fake punt in this game. They're going to go for 2, you'd imagine, in this game, try to maximize their advantage whenever they can, press their advantage. Give me the Black Knights to cover in this game.
Their last touchdown drive of their last game against North Texas, 21 plays, 94 yards, 13 minutes, 54 seconds. They will drain the clock. They could do it against Notre Dame. And you're going to give me 14.5 points? Give them to me.
Hook is your friend.
Give them to me. Let's recap the picks from BMAC and Richard. On opposite sides here in Columbus, both in agreement on Florida. They both agree with Alabama laying 13.5 in Norman. Both agree with Army, and they're split on Kansas and Colorado, the bubble games in Week 13. Coming up, a full bracket breakdown. Bryant McFadden is back, here to fill out his bracket, and you got to see who he's got winning it all. Next on CBS Sports HQ. The third set of college football playoff rankings are in, and here's a look at the projected bracket. So great to see the bracket. BYU visiting Ohio State. Alabama clashing with Notre Dame. Met a few years ago in the Rose Bowl, with Alabama winning that game. Georgia and Penn State in Happy Valley. Ole Miss and Indiana rounding out the first-round matchups. 11 games to be played, culminating with the national championship in Atlanta. Here we go. Welcoming former Florida State standout, 2-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden here for Bracket Breakdown, filling out the bracket just like college basketball. He loves doing that, loves doing this. Starting Columbus, Ohio State would host BYU. BMAC, are the Buckeyes on upset alert?
No, not at all. They're the more talented team. They have more stars. I love their defense. And when you look at BYU, I mean, they've been limping the last few weeks. Granted, they lost last week against Kansas, but they should have been upset the week before they played Kansas against Utah. So they've been skipped. They've been getting by barely by the skin of their teeth. And going into this matchup against Ohio State, you want to make sure you're clicking on all cylinders. And right now, BYU, they're not. Ohio State playing some really, really good, prolific-like football. So they're in Columbus. Give me Ohio State to advance.
All right, the projected 8-9 game features Notre Dame against Alabama. We saw this matchup a few years ago in the Rose Bowl. Who's moving on?
Roll Tide, roll. When you look at this game, tradition, prestige is all there. Two blue blood programs there in South Bend. But I'm taking Alabama because I believe more in Jalen Milroe than Riley Leonard. Granted, Riley Leonard has been playing some really, really good football. But when you look at Jalen Milroe, he is the ultimate playmaker for Alabama's offense. I think that would be a tall task for Notre Dame's defense. Yes, they've been playing some good football, but they haven't seen a player like Jalen Milroe the entire season. So I'm taking the Crimson Tide to advance.
All right, then Georgia visiting Happy Valley to play Penn State. Hopefully that's a night game. B-Mac, who you got?
I'm taking Georgia. And you know why, Hakeem? We talk weekly in terms of Penn State. The kryptonite for Penn State in the Big Ten has been Ohio State and Michigan, right? Guess who resembles both teams? Georgia. Georgia resembles both teams. Of course, Penn State won't play Michigan, but we saw what happened against Ohio State. It's something about big, fast, athletic teams that gives Penn State problems. I like UGA to advance in that first round against Penn State. Of course, you see it there to get to the quarterfinal.
All right, down the bracket, Ole Miss taking on Indiana. You got Lane Kiffin taking on Kurt Signetti. You got two coaches that know how to talk, know how to win the press conference, both know how to win. Who do you have winning this matchup?
Give me Ole Miss. I think when you look at Indiana, they're undefeated, but I think Indiana might be the one undefeated team in this bracket where no one really, really respects like that. Not saying they can't play competitive football, but their resume isn't impressive. To Ole Miss stands, when you look at what they've done, most recently beating Georgia, dominating Georgia at home, I love what they have going on in the trenches, especially on the defensive side. This is a different Ole Miss team than what we've seen under Lane Kiffin in years past when it comes to big guys that put their hand in the dirt. I think that will be too much for Indiana. Give me Ole Miss to advance.
All right, now let's move to the quarterfinals. Ohio State against Boise State. Just last week, that was going to be a first-round matchup, but Boise State gets a bye in this exercise. Who advances? You got Ashton Genty against that Ohio State defense.
I believe Ohio State's defense will be a bit too much for Ashton Genty. And I think Genty will get his yards because he is that dude. But I don't think he has enough to be able to carry his team. And then most importantly for me, Hakeem, I don't know if Boise has enough to slow down the wide receivers for Ohio State.
Yep.
We just saw Mr. Nash from San Jose State have a field day last week against Boise State. They had no answer. Yes, Boise won that ball game, but Nash had a great game. When you look at the pass catches that Ohio State have, it's not just one guy. You got 2, 3, 4 legit go-getters at the pass catching position. I think that would be a bit too much for Boise. Ohio.
I love when you do that. I love, and then when I can get you an OH, that's the next thing. When I get you OH, and you give me an IO, and then you.
I got you.
But it's tough though.
Whenever
You play for the Steelers, so you're my only friend that played for the Steelers. Because I don't have no friends that well, no, I don't have any NFL friends. I'm sorry, B-Mac, but at least I have one. I got a guy that played for the Steelers against my favorite diehard team, the Cleveland Browns. I can't believe it. All right, next quarterfinal matchup: Alabama against Oregon. Is it quack quack or is it roll tide?
It's quack quack for me. Dylan Gabriel playing some real high-level football. He will get that invitation to New York for the Heisman. The reason why I'm taking the Oregon Ducks is because of the balance they have on the offensive side. When you look at Alabama, they've been inconsistent in terms of allowing splash plays, either through the running game or through the aerial attack by opposing offenses. I think that will be a bit too much for Alabama. Their season comes to an end in the quarterfinal. Give me the Oregon Ducks to advance.
All right, keep me moving through the bracket here. This is where I could see a spread being like -9.5 in favor of Georgia. Georgia takes on Miami here. And what do you got in this scenario?
This would be the wrong matchup for Miami.
Yeah.
Two things we know about Miami. Their defense has been lackluster, right? They don't do anything well against the run or against the pass. They're vulnerable in either situation. And Cam Ward, that would be too much to ask of him to carry his team like he's done the entire season. So I'm taking the Georgia Bulldogs, and you're dead on when it comes to the potential spread. I can easily see 9.5, heck, maybe even 10 based on what Georgia did in the first round. So give me the Bulldogs to advance.
I like you're not going all chalk here. You're going based on programs. That's kind of fun. I like it. You're spicing things up, even though Georgia would be the favorite team.
Based on what we've seen.
Yeah.
Based on what our eyes have seen. Yes.
Yeah. This is when sort of like the number does not matter next to the team. It's that same way in college basketball. Unless you're the 1 seed, these numbers don't really mean a thing when you get in one-and-done situations here. Last quarterfinal matchup: Ole Miss against Texas, new SEC rivals. Who's advancing?
Based on the seeding, this will be an upset, but to your point, Ole Miss is a legit team, right? And I'm taking Ole Miss to advance, and here's why. You look at Texas, let's keep it real. Since Quinn Ewers has returned to the lineup from his injury, he hasn't looked the same like he did in the first month of the season. I mean, they struggled against Vanderbilt a few weeks ago, and they struggled against Arkansas. You know, getting by Arkansas, when you look at what we felt what happened in that ball game, that was a close game to say the least. Ole Miss is playing some inspired football. They're playing physical football. They can run, they can stop the run, and they have a quarterback in Jackson Dart who has an abundance of experience as well. Give me the Rebels to advance.
All right, so Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, and Ole Miss in your Final Four. Now to the semifinals. We'll start with the one at the top there, Ohio State against Oregon for perhaps the 3rd time. Saw him in the regular season. Perhaps we see him in the Big Ten title game, and then here in the playoff. Who's playing for the Natty?
Ohio State is. Ohio State. Like you said, this could be the 3rd meeting. But right now, only thing I can talk about is the first meeting. The first meeting, Ohio State could have won that ball game. They didn't. But guess what? This meeting in the bowl game is not happening there in Eugene. That was a huge factor when you talk about the home field advantage. This is a neutral site game. And to that point, we know Oregon fans travel. But when it comes to Buckeye Nation, they really, really travel. I think that helps the Ohio State Buckeyes to advance. And regardless of what happens in the Big Ten championship game, I believe Ohio State in this scenario will advance to the national championship game in Atlanta. Give me the Buckeyes, Hakeem. I know you love that.
This is what they're paying Ryan Day to do. Get him back here to this spot. In the other semifinal, SEC rivals Georgia against Ole Miss. Do the Dogs avenge their regular season loss and play for the national championship?
You better believe it. It's hard to beat a Kirby Smart team twice in the same year. They got embarrassed weeks ago in Ole Miss. You better believe Kirby Smart will have his players highly inspired, motivated, and Carson Beck, he woke up last week. When you look at what he did against Tennessee, that's the Carson Beck we thought we would see throughout this season. There have been some highs and some lows, but now it seems like he's clicking at the right time. Give me UGA to beat Ole Miss for the 2nd time in this meeting, for the 2nd meeting between these two teams to advance to a potentially neutral site game that will have a home field vibe for Georgia in Atlanta.
It will indeed. Now for all the marbles, here it is. Ohio State against Georgia. The Dogs beat the Buckeyes in an epic game 2 seasons ago in the CFP semis. I am relegated to the fact this is one thing you cannot change. The fact that C.J. Stroud got to play in that game, that upped his draft stock. He doesn't get in because remember USC, they messed their whole chances up. They lost in the Pac-12 title game. C.J. Stroud getting into that game and having the game he had against Georgia, he had 4 touchdowns. He was incredible. They lost by, 1 point, I think? So that game was incredible. Maybe this game will be incredible. Does Ohio State get revenge?
There's no maybe in terms of will this game be incredible? It will be. And to your point, to your question, yes, this is Ohio State's game. And here's why. Talent. You talked about Ryan Day. This is what he is supposed to do. Let's keep it real. In terms of NIL, he has the best team NIL can buy. And they have delivered outside of that blemish weeks ago in Eugene. Wide receivers, running backs, offensive linemen, D linemen, linebackers, secondary play, they have it. The most talented team in college football And I understand when you talk about Georgia and the experience they have, having a national championship coach, national championship quarterback, this would be a bit too much for UGA. I'm taking the Buckeyes to come through in the clutch to win the national championship this season.
So let me ask you something real quick here. If Ohio State meets Oregon in the Big Ten title game, what's happening there? Does Oregon win that game too?
I think Oregon wins that game.
So then that's where Ohio State is the 5 seed there, and they're going to have to travel all the way. Okay.
Yeah, I think Oregon win that game in Ohio State. And the thing is about this bracket, there's a lot that's going to take place that will give us a better look in what this bracket could look like. But in terms of the games this weekend, Hakeem, I'll tell you this much. If Indiana happens to lose to Ohio State, regardless, if they happen to lose and finish the season with 1 loss, I don't think Indiana gets into the playoffs, unfortunately.
Wow. Okay.
That would pave the way for another SEC team.
Yep.
Because in terms of Indiana, their overall schedule, their resume is not impressive. Their most impressive win to date is against Michigan, and Michigan is not the Michigan that we saw a year ago. So if they lose to Ohio State in the regular season, that 1 loss happened. I don't know if that's good enough to get into the playoffs, unfortunately.
I'm going to give you a heads up right now. Indiana fans are going to be coming to your mentions right here. Just let you know. Be ready. Okay.
I don't want any smoke. I'm sorry.
I mean, look, BYU fans came at me. I didn't disrespect them. I was just stating facts. So just get ready. Who's your daddy? Indiana.
Well, just win on Saturday.
Yeah, there you go.
You don't have to worry about it and wait for the committee.
You're right.
Just win on Saturday.
B-Mac, appreciate it, filling out his bracket here on CBS Sports HQ. Got Ohio State winning it all. They've won 8 national championships in school history, their last one coming in 2014, the first year of the college football playoff. Coming up, much more reaction to the latest CFP rankings and the bracket. Danny Cannell joins us with his biggest takeaways. You're watching CBS Sports HQ. Keep it locked. Show me the bracket. 3rd set of college football playoff rankings have been released, and here's a look at the projected bracket after 3 weeks of doing this exercise, bringing up plenty of debate and conversation. First-round matchups from top to bottom. BYU taking on Ohio State, Alabama facing Notre Dame, Georgia and Penn State clashing in Happy Valley, and Ole Miss visiting Indiana in the first round. The first-round buys, Boise State getting a first-round bye, Oregon, Miami, and Texas. And again, the top 5 conference champions will earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest-ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. So you're like, well, how does that happen? Well, the reason that happens is because Boise State is ranked higher than BYU. Boise State is 12 in the CFP rankings. BYU is 14 in the latest set of playoff rankings. Got it? Good. Let's break it down. Welcome in CBS Sports college football writer Richard Johnson here in studio, and former college and NFL quarterback Danny Cannell. The big story, at least my big takeaway, was the fact that the SEC has 5 teams in the top 11. Danny, what do you make of that?
Oh, don't get me started, Keem. I mean, it's been a long, month or so that we're going with. I've just kind of gotten used to it. My skin has been hardened. I'm just like thickened from all the SEC, love that's been out there this year, despite, a lot of these teams playing each other, but then they're bolstered by their wins. But I am kind of used to it. And most of them are worthy of being in this consideration, in this vicinity of the brackets. What I took away, Hakeem, what I thought was most fascinating about the bracket that we just threw up there was the fact that of these SEC teams, the way the seeding is right now, that most of them would be on the road in cold weather environments. But I'd say let's go. Now, of course, with a lot of football left to play, a couple more weeks of the season, would that hold up? Probably not. But that's been the one thing that most people that are Big Ten fans always say, well, you guys never have to travel up here in November or December. And you look at that. I mean, imagine some of these matchups of Bama going to Notre Dame, Georgia having to go to Penn State. Those types of atmospheres would be phenomenal, and I would love to see it happen. But that was the thing that jumped out to me when I looked at those SEC teams, with them going on the road to some cold environments. especially when we just watched a game. The Tennessee-Georgia game, players were complaining about a heated bench, and it was 50 degrees. Like, I cannot wait to see that happen.
I'm going to make Danny Cannell's night right here, right?
All right.
We talk about potentially getting 5 SEC teams in.
Yep.
And tonight, Hakeem, me and you have talked about quite often that I don't think Tennessee should make it in if we play this out and we have these teams win out and all that sort of stuff. But I want to bring up Texas here. If Texas doesn't win out and the Longhorns lose to Texas A&M, Texas's best win is against Michigan. And then they would have gotten smoked by Georgia, and they would have gotten beaten by Texas A&M on Thanksgiving weekend, and they wouldn't go to the SEC championship game. The College Football Playoff Committee has already shown that they don't care if you're a top 3 team. They will boot you out of the top 12 and out of the playoff field. That's what they did to Georgia last week after they lost to Ole Miss. Now, obviously, Georgia is now back in the field because of what they did against Tennessee. But I don't think Texas should be sleeping very soundly that they'll get in this field no matter what. They have got to win on Thanksgiving weekend against the Aggies, or I think their resume gets very shaky very quickly.
So the SEC with 5 teams in the top 11. So you could make the argument, Danny, that 5 teams could get into the playoff. Tennessee's on the outside looking in because of the conference champions, but you could make the case that Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Georgia, and Texas all get into the playoff field, which means you'd lose one of the Big Ten teams. It would be either Penn State or, I guess, Ohio State if they lose to Indiana. When we talk about what's at stake between Indiana and Ohio State, what's at stake here?
Oh, I mean, this is huge magnitude. Clearly, there's more at stake for Indiana. Their resume has been picked apart, and it isn't the strongest resume, right? Their best. You know, when I get asked who their best win is, I've been telling people it's 10 wins in a row and winning most of those games really convincingly. But here's what kind of bothers me, and I'm glad Richard brought this up, because Texas, when we talk about their resume isn't great. And if you bring in the eye test, how did they look and how did they keep it close versus Georgia? They didn't. It was 31-15, and it was in their backyard. And yet we're telling Indiana, oh, well, you have to go to Ohio State. You have to better keep it close, or you're going to get out. You're going to be booted from the party. So, but I do think, as unfair as it is, I do think Indiana needs to hold up against Ohio State, to keep it probably at single digits, but most importantly, to look the part. And we've seen Ohio State embarrass some teams over the past 15 years. I remember a Wisconsin Big Ten championship game when Ohio State needed style points. They won 59-0. I don't think that happens. But for Indiana's sake, I do think they need to keep it close to show the committee and all of their critics out there that they can play with the best in the country. It's a different standard. I don't like it, but I do think that's what Indiana needs to do to preserve their playoff chances. Obviously, if they win, it takes care of itself. But if they lose, I think they have to keep it close.
Richard, do you agree there that there's a score threshold within 2 touchdowns? And even Danny's saying within 7 points.
Yeah, the spread is creeping towards 2 touchdowns, right, and I think Indiana's got to cover it. I think Indiana's got to keep it close. I love that Danny brings up that Ohio State has actually been in this position many times before, where they have kind of a usurper Big Ten team, and then they end it. A couple years ago, Michigan State, right? That Michigan State team had beaten Michigan. Now, they took a loss against Purdue, but they'd beaten Michigan. We thought they were really good. Kenneth Walker, all that sort of stuff. And then they went into Columbus and they got clowned by the Buckeyes, where Ohio State said, this is our league, we're in the weight class, and you're not. So Ohio State has done this before against conference opponents. Yes, Indiana has got to show well in that game on Saturday. Obviously, you want to win it, but you got to show well in that game.
Well, right now, in terms of conference title games, because we've got this absolute logjam atop the SEC, we know that Alabama would be there right now because they have the best strength of schedule in conference play. So, Danny, if you're looking at that and you have, let's say, a 3-loss Alabama team and a 1-loss Indiana team, who's going to get in?
So you're saying, Hakeem, that if the Alabama made it to the SEC championship game but lost?
Yep. If they went out losing the SEC title game.
Right. This is the biggest problem, I think, in the current format, and it's a massive problem, especially when you already see coaches out there like Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss saying he's talked to other coaches that think it might benefit you not to play in the title game. You know, you get to sit at home, have a bye essentially, and watch those other teams beat up each other. And even worse, I think the optics of penalizing a team for getting there, I think, is an awful look. Now, I would have no problem saying, Alabama, that's your third loss, take it home. Indiana, you're in. Again, I think it comes back to how does Indiana look in that situation. But I would also say the same. Why is it only the SEC that we wouldn't punish? Like, what about if the ACC has a couple of one-loss teams in SMU and Miami? Are we just going to send the loser of that game packing? Same thing, Big 12, and same thing with the Big 10 with the losers of those games. It's the biggest flaw in the system. I don't think it lasts for long because I think they correct it after 2 years of this experiment. But while we sit here, I think it's the biggest flaw, and I think potentially you could see a loser in a conference championship get sent home, while a team that's sitting at home gets to advance. And I think it's messed up.
Oh, Danny, I think we both know what's going to happen with the ACC title game loser. And they ain't going to be in a 12-team field. Come on, we both agree there, I'm sure.
They'll be in the NIT.
Yeah, they'll be in the NIT. I think this is some of the reason why, and Danny brings up the concept of fairness. And I know that we both agree that it's not fair. And the SEC and the Big Ten, but the SEC is stacked the deck, and they are very much invested in continuing to stack the deck. The SEC and the Big Ten are starting to hear the saber rattling about they want more guaranteed spots.
Of course they do.
In this deal. They want to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again, where you got the three of us sitting on these desks arguing about who should get in and who's not, and 5 and 3 and all that sort of stuff. They're going to try to shore this up on the back end in the boardrooms if we get real, true chaos that leaves the SEC out in the cold.
I'm going to give you this right now, and then we're going to move on, because I'm just going to give you this. I'm just going to state facts. According to Stephen O's Sports Line model, the SEC has 7 of the top 11 teams in the country: Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and LSU. All of these teams are ranked higher than Indiana and any team from the ACC, Big 12, American, and Mountain West Conference. That's just what he's got in his projections. These are projections.
LSU is laugh out loud funny. If we're putting him in there, that's just laugh out loud funny. Like, come on, what are we doing?
I'm just telling you the facts. Do with what you please on that. And speaking of Boise State, Danny, you have a little bit of a problem here because currently they're in position for a first-round bye. Why?
So it's because they could be ranked higher than the Big 12 champ, especially when you consider the Big 12 still has a lot of meaningful games left. I mean, I think there's a chance you could have a 3-loss team playing for the Big 12 championship. And if they are ranked higher, if Boise State is ranked the highest as a conference champion, they would get in. Here's my problem with it. And while I don't think it would last, because you mentioned the Big 12 or Big 10 and SEC heavyweights having an issue with it, what do you think that Brett Yormark would do with the Big 12 saying, hey, wait a second, we're a Power 4 team. You're a Group of 5 team. You've played one Power 4 opponent in Oregon, which you lost, and you're going to get a bye, and we have to go out here and bang heads with one of these heavyweights from the Big 10 or SEC. I think that one would really shock a lot of people to see Boise State get a bye. Mountain West is a nice conference, but here's my issue. I think there's a clear delineation. We can talk about all these, and I think there's a line of demarcation. The SEC, yes, it's the toughest. Then there's the Big 10, a little bit low at big ACC, Big 12, probably about the same. But I do think there's another significant drop in Group of 5 strength of schedules, and that I think is a big problem that Boise State. I've always been a Group of 5 fan, saying they deserve a chance at the party, but to get that much of an edge in a first-round bye, I think you would see a change, and I think you would see a lot of people upset about it, and I think justifiably so.
I actually disagree there, Danny, because I would take Boise on a neutral field against either BYU or Colorado, well, I guess, or Arizona State. We got to throw Arizona State in there, too. I think BYU has an edge in those games. I think it's probably pretty narrow, but I look at all these all these Big 12 teams, and I see that none of them really are head and shoulders over the other. Pretty much every time they go out on the field, the spreads are within a field goal. I mean, Colorado's only a 2.5-point favorite over Kansas this week, and Kansas just beat BYU. So I like this BYU team a lot. I think BYU's in a fine spot as that 4th automatic qualifier and not the 5th.
All right. Boise State's look, Boise State's only loss is to Oregon by 3 points. So you know, I can make the case either way. I see the argument,
Hakeem,
but but hey, look, Danny,
losses,
I love the Big 12.
Quality losses is my favorite. You know, just
right.
I'm going to teach my children about losing quality.
It is though. A quality loss is a good thing. Sportsmanship, keeping it close. You don't want to get blown out. You only lose by 3.
There's no such thing as
I know,
quality
a loss is a loss. I get it. A loss is a loss. Look, I get it. A loss is a loss. But look, it's going to be a tough conversation because the Big 12 has been very, very good, and the Mountain West has been good for Boise State, and they've played very, very well with a Heisman candidate in Ashton Genty. Ohio State is the favorite to win it all. Danny, do you like Ohio State to win it all when all is said and done?
So, Hakeem, I'm a little bit stubborn, so I'm sticking with my preseason pick to win it all, and that would be the Oregon Ducks, who did get the best of Ohio State the first time around, and I know it was close, and it was one more second on the clock. Maybe Ohio State comes up with that one. And Oregon has just been kind of very businesslike. They haven't been flashy. Dylan Gabriel is, yes, he's in the Heisman mix, but he doesn't have the Heisman moment. His stats aren't exactly tops in the country, but I think they are the most complete team. And when they get Tez Johnson back, I think that reinforces them as one of the most, pure, like most complete teams in the country. We already saw them stack up. I get it was at home, but I do think they're probably benefiting too from getting healthier on the back end, not having to have so many games that are coming down the wire and putting a lot of guys' bodies on the line. And when they get Jordan Birch back on the defense, Tez Johnson on the offense, I still think they're the best. And I trust Dylan Gabriel more than probably any quarterback in the country of the title contenders to handle his business. So I think it's Oregon.
Danny, my friend, I am stubborn too, and so I am sticking with my preseason national championship pick, those Ohio State Buckeyes. I think the Buckeyes, in the end, cream will rise to the top, and the Buckeyes will have the national championship in their hands. Frankly, if they get this path, I think this path that is projected right now by the field is actually pretty good for Ohio State. They get to play BYU in the first round, then they would play Boise theoretically in the second round. Obviously, we know that a lot can change here, but I think this would be a great path for them to get to the semifinals, and then we'd see what happens from there. Maybe they'd play Oregon for a third time.
We'll see.
Oof.
We'll see. It'll be incredible as we look at these CFP rankings, and Ohio State right now the favorite to win it all, but Oregon looking to win its first national championship in school history. Danny Cannell and Richard Johnson here on CBS Sports HQ. Oregon right behind Ohio State with the second shortest odds at plus 440. Ohio State 8 titles in school history, their last in 2014, the first year of the college football playoff.